As you work in Google Sheets, have you ever found that the functions that you know just don't quite do what you need for them to do? For example, you might want to use an AND or an OR Boolean logic, and yet you're a little hesitant to find out if that's even possible. Well, the good news is you can use and OR. And they are even more effective if you use one of the functions we've already looked at, if. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Consumer Technology Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library. And let's look at and or, and if within Google Sheets. Our example spreadsheet today is just a really small result of a search that we did. And what we are looking for is something to do with books and dogs. Now, some of these books are juvenile, some of them are more adult. So evidently we have a family that decided that their reading for the month would be based on some books about dogs. So the title is in column A, the author is in column B, the format, whether that is a book or an audiobook, is in C, and in column D, we want to know if the book is available now so we can just check it out immediately, or whether we need to place it on hold and wait before we can get the book. What we've decided to do first is look for Lois Duncan as the author, and then we want to find books by Lois Duncan, not audiobooks. Well, we have two different conditions that we're trying to meet. Both of them, because of the and, need to be true. If either one or both of these conditions, as we go through, are false, then the whole formula winds up being false, or with an answer of false. So let's click in F2, and then we're going to go up to our toolbar, and we're going to go to the very last button, the Functions button here. That looks like either a Greek sigma or a just kind of fancy E. And as we go down, we know that AND is a logical function. So as I hover on logical, I get kind of a sub-menu here, and then I'm going to go up to the very top and click on AND. Now, this automatically puts in the equal sign and the function and then we have here an example of what we need to do within the parentheses. So what it says is we need logical expression 1, we'll put in a comma, and then logical expression 2, and we could put in more if we wanted to. Well, our first logical expression would be, we'll just start at the first row here in our spreadsheet. So that would be B2. I'm just going to click on it. Does it equal Lois Duncan? Now, Lois Duncan is text, so I need to type Lois Duncan with quotation marks on either side at the beginning and the end. Then I'll put in my comma, as we've been shown to do, and now we need to put in logical expression 2. And what we're looking for is the format of book. And so I'm just going to click on C2 and say equals, but again, this is text, so in quotes, I'm going to put book, and in the quotes, and almost immediately after pressing enter, it says, well, that's false. Now, we know that because the author is Joseph O'Neill, and right there, because with an and, they both have to be true. Because the author is Joseph O'Neill, it's an automatic false. And then the format, though, darn, it was a book, but because one was false, both wind up false. Now I'm going to click in F2 and find our little fill handle and click and drag down. And I've already added some conditional formatting to these cells. So we have a lot of falses, don't we, for various reasons. Now we have a true here. So let's see, the true is Lois Duncan and book. Coming on down, we have 2 in a row. Hotel for dogs, which is Lois Duncan and book, and movie for dogs, which is Lois Duncan and book. So this becomes very helpful as you try to determine some of the criteria and some of the ways that you need to add in formulas to your spreadsheet. Well, let's come down and do another example that is just simply all numbers instead of having text values. So first of all, let me click in F23 here. And what we are looking for is both homework and test averages over 70. So this is like a class roster where we have the name of the particular attendee in this class, what their homework average is, and then what their test average is. And both of these, homework and test, must be over 70. All right, so let's see how that would look. Now that I've clicked in the correct cell, I want to go back up to functions and go down to logical, and then over to the left and up to the top to and. And what is my first logical expression? Well, it's the first cell that has a homework average, and that's B23, and all I need to know is that greater than 70? And then I'll put in my comma, as shown in this pattern, and then it says, what is the next logical expression? Well, I'm going to click in C23 to add that in, or I could type it in as well. Is that greater than, and our stipulation was over 70. And then I can press enter, and sadly, poor Emma doesn't have a true for either of those scores. But now we'll find our fill handle, click and drag down. And again, I've done some pre-formatting. So let's look at a true here where we have Rex Davidson. Wow, this is an A student, isn't it? Homework average of 96, a test average of 91. That's amazing. But let's go up one where we have another false, but look at this poor person. Christy Bailey has an 86 homework average, but test anxiety evidently, because here's the test scores of 54. And remember, we're looking for both homework and test averages being over 70. So this is a false. And so whether this is a pizza party or an extra treat of some kind, poor Christy is going to be left out because both of her scores are not over 70. And then we can go through, and sadly, here's another one, kind of the same idea. Cody Fleming has a 93 for homework, but a 62 for tests, and so that's another false. And is a great way to find out if two or more cells meet certain conditions, and if they all meet the conditions they're supposed to meet, then you get a true, and then you can do something else based on the answers that you get. For our next example, I've kept the same essential information as we had before, but this time what we are looking for is or. So with or, what we need is for one of the criteria to be true, and then whether the other one is true or not, it will be considered true. So quite a departure from and. Well, what we are going to look for is John Katz as the author, or if the book is available now. So we're going to click in F2 for our first formula, and then we'll go up to our functions button, go down to logical, and go over to the left, but we're going to go to or this time and click on it. And just as before, we're going to have the start of this formula by having an equal sign and then or, and then all we need to do is supply what goes in the parentheses. So our first logical expression is we're looking for John Katz. Well, John Katz is an author, so that means B2. And again, I can click or type in B2 either way. And does it equal, and then I need to put in quotes because this is a person's name, John Katz, and in the quotes, and then our pattern shows that next is a comma, and then what is our logical expression number 2? Well, what we want to do is find out, is it available? So I'm going to click on D2 and say equal. And what we're looking for is really yes or hold. So I'm going to put in quotes because, again, this is text, yes. And then I'll press enter. And it is true because while the author is not John Katz, it is available. And then I'm going to click on that cell, find the fill handle, and click and drag down. And we have a lot of true answers when we use or. Okay, let's see what it takes to be false. So, is this John Katz? No, it's Joseph O'Neill. Is it available? No, it's on hold. So both of those conditions are false, which makes the statement then false. Here is another example of a true where the author is Dave Pilkey. Well, that certainly isn't John Katz, but the book is available. Now let's see if we can find a John Katz. And yes, it is John Katz, and as a matter of fact, it is available. So both of those conditions are met, and that is also true. Now coming on down, let's do a numeric example as well. So I'll click here in F23, and this time what we are looking for is the homework average greater than 85, or is the test average greater than 90? How does that work out? Well, I've clicked here in F23. We'll go to the Functions button. We'll come down to Logical, and then over to the left to OR. And again, I just start at the top of this spreadsheet. So is the homework greater than 85? Well, we'll start here in B23 and type in greater than. And then I need to actually type in that literal 85. And then in my pattern next, we have a comma. So we'll type in the comma. Now, are the tests greater than 90? So I need to come over to C23. And again, I can either click on that cell or I can type in the cell reference of C23, put a greater than, and then I'll type in my number 90 and press enter. And no, poor Emma has a 68 and a 51. Neither one of those conditions is met. So let me click on this cell in F23 and then click and drag down. We still have a lot of truths though, so let's see how that works. Here where we have Christy Bailey, she has a homework average of 86, which is greater than the 85, so that's true. But the tests greater than 90? No, that's not true. But with the or, as long as one is true, the whole thing is true. So her homework has saved her here, and yes, this is counted as true. Now, of course, we also looked at Rex Davidson, who had 90s for everything, and so definitely his homework average is greater than 85. That alone would have been enough to make this a true, but he also had a 91 test average, which is, again, more than, or at least it meets the criteria that we ask for, and so that is also true. And so you'll notice that generally you're going to have a lot more true statements when you use or, because it expands the logic as opposed to and, which really narrows it down. Now let's stay with that first example of the books about dogs. And let's expand what we've learned a little bit here. So at first, we're simply going to look at book and available. And by now, you know how to do that one. We'll go up to the Functions button, Logical, and we're going to use and. The first condition here is book, and book is under format, so that's C2, and we'll simply type equals and then put in quotes, book, and then add in our comma to separate the two expressions. And then our logical expression 2 is it available? So that is column D, in this case D2, and we'll say equals and then put in quotes, yes, and press enter. And that is true, that we have a book, and yes, it is available. Well, we'll click in our cell in F2 and then find the fill handle, click and drag down, and find all of the times where we can see that we have a book and it is immediately available. Well, we can also, though, combine our ands and ors. And this becomes a little more complicated, but it can really give you the answers that you need. So what we want to find out now is it a book and available, which is kind of what we just did, or is it Lois Duncan, the author? So how do we write that? Well, we're going to start off like we did before. And so let's go to our functions button, go down to logical, and then up to and. And we know now that we want the book. Well, book is in C2 equals, and then in quotes, book. Put in our comma. What is our next expression? Well, we want to know if it's available, so that is column D, or in this case, D2 equals, and then in quotes, because we're just dealing with text, yes. And so far, this works out really well, but we also then say that we want to know or Lois Duncan. And I'm going to suggest that it may be easiest to come up to the formula bar. And in the formula bar, I'm going to click between the equal sign and the and, because we've set up essentially our first condition, which is the and statement. Now we're going to put in our or statement that encompasses also the and statement. And so we're going to click between the equals and the and we're going to type or. Now, just as we saw before, we need to put in a left parenthesis to separate the functions. Now, here's the thing. I have this and, book and yes, as my first condition, or what is the second condition? So that means that on the far right, I'm going to put in a comma, and what is the next expression for the or? What is the next test? Well, it's Lois Duncan. So the author is in B2. It's a little hard to see, so I'm just going to type in B2 equals, and then in quotes, Lois Duncan. In the quotes. Now, here's the thing. I have 1, 2 left parentheses. I need to have 2 right parentheses as well. So here's 1. I need to add in a second one after Lois Duncan, and then press enter. I'm even given a chance to just autofill, so I can either press Control Enter or I can use my check mark. I'm just going to use the check mark. So how did this work? All right, we have book and available. Yes, that is true. Or Lois Duncan. That is not true, but remember with an or, either one of the expressions can be true and then the whole thing is true. So this is true. Let's come down then to a false, and we'll just look at the next one here. So is this a book? Well, no. Is it available? No. So our first condition is false. And is it Lois Duncan? No, that's not true either. So this whole thing is false. So this shows up as false. Let's look at this one. We have, is it a book? Yes, it is. Is it available? Yes. So that and is true. Now, is it Lois Duncan? No. But Lois Duncan is part of the or, so because this first part is true, the book and the yes, then Dave Pilkey, it doesn't matter. We have one part of the equation as true, so the whole thing is true. Now we happen to have even a Lois Duncan book here. Let's look at it. Is it a book? No, it's not. Is it available? Yes. But remember with an and, it's not a book, so this whole thing here is false. However, because our author is Lois Duncan, and Lois Duncan is the second condition within the or statement, then that becomes true because one set of these equations is true. Wow. You can see how this could be amazingly versatile for you. Now, if I can do an and an or, can I also do an or and an and? Oh my goodness, let's see what that does. So let's start here, and we know what we want to do. Let's go to the Functions button. Let's go to Logical, and this time we're starting with or. So we're saying, okay, is it a book? So that is C2 equals, and we want to put in quotes, book. And then we put in our comma for the second expression. And is it available? So that is D2 equals, and yes. However, that's just the or. But now we want to put and Lois Duncan. So again, I find it just as easy to come up to the formula bar, click between the equal sign and the or, and we're going to type and then put in our left parentheses. So we're adding in a second expression because our first expression is this or. We've already done it. So to the right of that, we're going to put in our comma and put in the next logical expression, which in this case is B2 equals, and then in quotes, Lois Duncan. Again, we need to check our parentheses. So on the left-hand side, we have 1, 2 left parentheses. We only have one right parentheses. We need to add in one more at the end and press enter. And again, I'm going to autofill. So because I have book or available, and that's really kind of the widest kind of logic, and then I pull it in with this and Lois Duncan, then I have much fewer results that are true. So let's see how this works. Let's go to a true statement here where we have, yes, the author is Lois Duncan. Remember, that's the second part of our equation here. And then the first part is, well, it's an audiobook, which isn't true, but it is available. And remember, it's book or available. So because it's available, the first expression is also true. So I have two trues, so this becomes a true. And you can play with this, and it's amazing what you can do and the results that you can get. Now let's add in the if statement, which when you use if, you test for a condition and then you say what to do if that condition is true and if it is false. So it's a natural fit with and or. So in our first example here, if John Katz is the author and the book is available, then we want to say, check out the book. And if it's not John Katz or it's not available, then we're going to just say, well, we'll leave that one blank. All right, so how do we do that? Well, we'll go to our function button, and we're going to start with the and. So we'll go to logical and. And what are we testing for? Well, we're testing for, is the author in B2, does that equal John Katz? Put in our comma. What is the second part of that? Is the book available? Well, that means D2 equals, and then in quotes, yes. And we've certainly done this before, but now that is just the test for the if statement. So we're going to come out between the equal sign and the and again, it's a little easier to see on the formula bar, and I'm going to put if, and then put in the left parenthesis to separate the if from its logical expression, which is our and statement. All right? So if John Katz and the book is available, then on the far right, we're going to put in our comma, and we're going to say, what is that value if true? Well, the value of true is, and I'm going to put in quotes, check out book in the quotes, put in my comma, because that's how that pattern reads, and then what do I put if the value is false? Well, in this case, I'm just going to put in a blank cell, so I'm going to put quote, space, quote. Again, we need to check our parentheses. So on the left-hand side here, I have 1, 2, left parentheses, and then as I move along, I have 1 right parentheses. I need to add another one at the end, and then we will press enter. Because this isn't John Katz and available, then I just have a blank. But let me find the fill handle here and click and drag down. And we have one actual kind of true statement. So let's check this out. It is John Katz, it is a book, and it is available. But if we test for any of these other conditions, is it John Katz? Well, no. Is it available? Yes, but remember, they both have to be true for that statement to be true. So that's pretty interesting, isn't it? Come down one more. Now, this is John Katz, but the book is on hold, so we can't check it out. So that is sort of the basics of how to do an if and an and. And now, if we can do an if and an and, we can also do an if and or. So let me come up to G2 here. This time, we're going to test for John Katz or if the book is available first. And then we're going to say, well, if it is John Katz or available, we're going to check out the book. And if not, then we will put in a blank cell. So let's do that. Let's go to our function button, go down to logical, and this time we're going to go to or. What is our or? John Katz, so that's the author. Does B2 equal, and in quotes, John Katz? I'll put in my comma as the pattern here suggests, and then what is my logical expression to? Well, we said, is the book available? So that is D2 equals, and then in quotes as well, yes. Now from here, I need to add in my if statement, so I'm going to go up to the formula bar, and between the equal sign and the or, I'm going to put in if, and a left parenthesis. So now this reads, if, and my first logical expression is John Katz or the book is available. So I'll come to the right of that expression, put in my comma. What is the value if it's true? Oh, well, I'm going to put in quotes, check out book. Put in the comma again, as the pattern shows. What is the value if false? And we're just going to put quote, space, quote. And as a last check, we're going to look for the left and right parentheses, so let's check it out. Starting here on the left, I have 2 left parentheses. As I go to the right, I only have 1 right parenthesis, so I need to put in another right parenthesis and then press the enter. And this says I can check out the book. So it's not John Katz, but remember, it's or available. So yes, it is available. I'm going to check out that book. And then I'm going to click and drag down. So I copy the formula all the way down. And this time I'm going to check out a whole lot of books. Now, here is a blank cell, so let's check that out. Is it John Katz? No. Is it available? No. So because I have 2 no's for that or, then the whole thing is false. And because it's false, I'm going to put in a blank. And, or, and then combining and or and then adding if can give you such a broad scope of possibilities when you add logic to your spreadsheet. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org youtube.com/online learning for such great resources as Universal Class, Learning Express Library, LinkedIn Learning, and Udemy Business. We also premiere videos every Wednesday and Friday at 1 o'clock. If you miss a video premiere, you'll still be able to find it later when it's convenient for you. You can find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, and you can find us on YouTube by going to our MCPL MO channel.